3 of the series on the Georgia Guidestones, and reading some excerpts from Common Sense Renewed by the mysterious Robert Christian. You can also title the series, How to Learn to Kill Yourself and Feel Good About It. I'm going to skip chapter 5, entitled Suffrage in the United States. You know, it's voting. You know, like, what are we even talking about voting for? And the next chapter is Prospects for the American Economy. And I'm going to lop off a bunch of stuff that he wrote at the beginning, because he's very pedantic. And we don't have to learn about the way labor was in 5 quick pages. We'll get to the point with him. And it said, in the 20th century, we are witnessing other fundamental changes as the common pool of knowledge is disseminated throughout the world. Human populations continue to grow rapidly, due in large part to advances in medicine and sanitation. Formerly backward nations have developed educational systems that in some cases are superior to our own. They have adopted and are improving the technology of the Western world, often to a level beyond what has been achieved here and in Europe. Other nations, not least Japan, Taiwan, and Korea in the Far East, have learned from the Western nations and in some areas of technology are surpassing them. They have dramatically increased their consumption of raw materials as they have educated their people and have provided them with factories and distribution facilities that incorporate the most recent technical advances. Their workers enter the job market with skills equal to or better than those of Americans, but with the wages far below customary American levels, their managers are competent and aggressive. They streamline and perfect the productive process, demonstrating great talent in securing resources in the world market. They are producing sophisticated manufactured products and marketing them with great success throughout the world. They are actively assisted at all times by their governments, who demonstrate an informed and cooperative attitude in promoting their efforts at home and abroad. Japan, Korea, and Taiwan are causing revolutionary changes in the roles of the older industrialized nations. Unfortunately, the rulers and workforces of some Western nations are unwilling to accept and appropriately adapt to those changes. Americans have grown accustomed to the comfortable living standards based upon our once abundant resources. We are inclined to take them for granted. As our reserves dwindle, we make futile attempts to restore our primacy and per capita income through legislation, ignoring the fact that laws do not produce nuts and bolts and other consumer goods. We are losing some of the competitive spirit of our earlier successes. A growing segment of our population is becoming dependent upon government at a time when the government is approaching insolvency. Over the past 50 years, we have legislated a system of direct and indirect payments and subsidies to support citizens who are not gainfully employed. I think I know where we're going to go with this. Costs of such programs are borne by the segments of our society still engaged in productive work. We have established minimum wage standards which do not recognize honest market values for the labor of marginal workers. We thus unintentionally mandate idleness for many citizens, who then become tax burdens for their neighbors. Government assistance programs are by no means restricted to the poor. There are subsidies for farmers, for small businesses, for large corporations, and for cities and states. We have payments for the elderly, for veterans, for the physically handicapped, and for the socially blighted. We use tax funds to provide medical care, legal assistance, rent subsidies, educational grants, and home insulation. Federal benefits require volumes to simply list and describe them. We have other federal regulations and court opinions that require our state and local governments to provide specific assistance for the economically disadvantaged, for minority groups, and even for prisoners. In many instances, courts have broadened the coverage of federal and state laws far beyond the intent of the legislators who enacted them. If a factory worker with a family should break one of our many laws, he personally must pay for the services of a lawyer to defend himself. A chronically unemployed habitual criminal who has similar problems will have the services of a court-appointed attorney. The attorney, paid by the taxpayers, may carry appeals all the way to the Supreme Court if there is a slight chance of overturning a conviction on some technicality. A private citizen paying his own way might not pursue the matter with such determination. In some cases, the monetary value of tax-supported benefits for an unemployed person exceeds the income of other citizens who are working full-time at modest pay. These self-respecting citizens must contribute a part of their small earnings to support the idle, sometimes with amenities that are unavailable to their own families. The cost of welfare programs is a growing addition to the other handicaps, which must be faced by our manufacturers as they seek to underprice foreign competitors whose societies require that all citizens work. American businessmen are further hampered by the complexity of our laws, federal, state, and local. Legal considerations have become concerns of the first order in determining business decisions. Laws dealing with environmental impact, zoning, labor, and minorities, although well-intentioned, are a direct cause for increased costs. Several thick volumes are now required to clarify the federal income tax code. Skilled accountants are essential for businesses and many private citizens in computing their taxes. Outside the arena of direct legislation, regulations are promulgated by many government agencies with authority delegated to them by enabling acts. These may change from day to day. Failure to comply with them can cause serious financial losses, so American businesses find it necessary to employ costly legal staff simply to conduct routine operations. Corporations in other nations have their share of government meddling, but seldom with the degree of complexity which has become the lot of managers in America. In some cases, effective control of critical business decisions is given indirectly to government officials who might have little practical experience and who might be more concerned with the political impact of their performance than with the long-range economic effects. Some officials show little concern for our negative balance in foreign trade. They minimize the significance of our debtor status in the international world and take comfort in the naive belief that America can prosper as a service economy, with our people simply waiting on one another. They do not tell us how we will pay for the expensive consumer products that are at the core of high material living standards, and which in their scenario will be manufactured abroad. If we consume at high levels, we must produce at high levels, not only for our own use, but for world markets. It will be difficult to purchase Japanese electronics, Brazilian steel, and Arab oil with personal services. Sooner or later, a day of reckoning will come. Our continuing federal deficits, combined with interest payments on the accumulation of past deficits, and our ongoing foreign trade imbalance, combine to exceed the total annual savings of the American economy. There is no surplus to replace worn-out production equipment or to build new factories. There is no immediate shortage of most raw materials in world markets. Some commodities are available at lower prices than in the past, thanks to the modern production methods now being used to exploit reserves in some foreign lands. But this is a part of our problem. We Americans already have consumed our most accessible oil, iron, and other resources. We must now use foreign exchange funds to purchase some of those essentials abroad, bidding against other users. America is no longer the leader in most fields of technology. The Japanese and others have pushed ahead in electronics, automobile production, cameras, petroleum refining, metallurgy, machine tools, computers, office machines, robots, and other products required by modern industry. We now buy a large share of our shoes, clothing, and textiles from abroad, simply because they cost less. Hundreds of thousands of American jobs are lost as a result. Many other nations now practice the self-discipline necessary to excel in science, technology, manufacturing, finance, and international trade. Markets formerly dominated by the United States and Western Europe have been taken over by newcomers. Brazil has become a major producer of low-cost steel. Japanese steel undersells Pittsburgh steel in that city, notwithstanding shipping costs from Japan. The day of the unskilled laborer is rapidly becoming a memory. Most simple and many complicated tasks will be performed by robots, which do not get sick, or take vacations, or get overtime, or fringe benefits. Our schools continue to operate only 180 days a year, a schedule dating back to pioneer days when children also worked on the farm. This schedule is inadequate for teaching the skills required in an increasingly sophisticated world. You know, it's interesting here. It's like, you know, it was our decision, right, you and I and all of us, to go ahead and ship the means of productions overseas, and with the guilt laid on us that they can find cheaper workers over there, and that American workers are much too highly paid, much too overpaid. And now all of a sudden, school's calendar year is much too short. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to strip the United States deliberately of its industrial strength. And we're going to keep the kids in school as long as we can, so we can indoctrinate them to be good little burgers. You know, I mean, this guy is so duplicitous in what he writes. It's like, well, yeah, I decided to do this. I decided to send, Levi over to the Philippines back in 1974 and outsource tech jobs from Verizon to India. We are inclined to gear academic standards to mediocrity, while more enlightened foreign societies stress excellence, competition, and performance. We give too much attention to competitive sports at all grade levels, diverting funds and emphasis from scholastics, which are more important to our country in the longer view. Every year we graduate a plethora of attorneys, misemploying the talents of good students who in other nations might become engineers, scientists, and managers capable of more tangible, productive services for their fellow citizens. Nearly half of American high school graduates go on to college. Many have no specific goals and no strong motivation to acquire a liberal education or to excel in a particular field of study. So many students would be better employed in technical schools, acquiring skills our nation must have to prosper in the futures. Technical schools, to do what? They have no place to go to work with all the industry gone. In many countries, a college degree is difficult to achieve. There is intense competition for college admission. Poor students are rejected, and good students are pushed to maximum achievement. Many disappointments and frustrations are associated with this educational competition. Yet we live in a cold world which rewards excellence and punishes failure. It is folly to proceed on any other premise as we plan our national goals and devise programs for achieving them. An unavoidable burden of America in the closing years of this century is our role as the primary defender of the non-communist world. We have not sought out this responsibility. Yes, we have. It has devolved on us because we are the most powerful of the Western nations. It occupies a large share of our manpower and consumes our resources as we maintain military forces and sophisticated weaponry to prevent the expansionist forces of world communism from overwhelming the entire world. We spend nearly 7% of gross national product for defense, much more than Japan, Taiwan, Western Europe, and Latin America. This additional burden has aggravated our inability to compete in world markets against our adversaries and against the very nations who gather under our military umbrella for protection. Our problems are complex and interrelated and are interwoven with the traditions and expectations of American labor. As more and more foreign workers acquire the skills and facilities which were formerly restricted to only a few industrialized nations, there will be increasingly strong downward pressure on real wage levels. If America cannot compete through further mechanization of production, a process which demands greater capital investment, wages will move lower and more jobs will be lost to foreign workers. Capital is mobile. Billions of dollars can be electronically transferred in a twinkling from our economy to foreign nations where profits are greater. Meanwhile, we hamper our productive efforts with labor regulations which once may have been necessary, but which now are counterproductive. We tolerate strikes which might be avoided by compulsory or voluntary arbitration. We fail to inform our workforces of the impact which well-capitalized, low-wage foreign workers have had on our role in a dynamic and ever-changing world. American auto workers receive higher wages than their Japanese counterparts. At the same time, the Japanese have nearly twice as much invested capital behind each job in the form of robots, modern machinery, and advanced engineering. Japan makes a car in a fraction of the man-hours required in America and sells it in America at a profit for lower price. But the Japanese have competition too. Korean workers build cars for lower wages and threaten Japan's advantage. The Koreans in turn face Mexicans who are eager to work in plants built just across our border, accepting subsistence pay rates in their depressed economy. Competition, change, and shifting flows of trades are facts of life, which we must face with logic and realism if we are to continue to prosper as a free nation. In summary, America is handicapped by high labor costs, shrinking domestic raw material reserves, an insufficiently educated workforce, excessive litigation, burdensome debts and demands on government, short-sighted legislators, and an electorate that has yet to manifest sufficient awareness of the magnitude and complexity of our problems. Yet all these problems have potential solutions. Dealing with them will demand changes in our attitudes, expectations, and work habits. One root of our present dilemma is government, too much government. Not only have we permitted it to grow without restraint, we have encouraged it to develop irresponsible spending habits which would never be permitted in a sensible family budget. The mountainous federal debt overhangs our economy. And it cracks me up again. You and I, we encouraged the government to grow and to waste money. We did that. Right. We did it. There are parallels between our federal finances and those of Germany in 1922. Her national debt at the time was primarily reparations claimed by the victorious Allies after World War I, 1 trillion marks payable in gold. Our national debt is in the form of government bonds, held to a large extent by financial institutions and insurance companies, and in vast commitments for future obligations of many kinds. We owe large sums to foreign investors and are adding to the debt through deficit spending and an international trade deficit. The ratio of our debts to assets is roughly comparable to that of Germany over 60 years ago, and we have not been treating our debtors honestly. We have continuously defaulted on our bonded indebtedness through the ruse of monetary inflation, repaying borrowed dollars with cheaper inflation dollars. In the meantime, bond owners pay taxes on the interest. Americans who buy bonds are shortchanged on their investment. As the dollar erodes in value, so do savings accounts, life insurance policies, pension reserves, and all other dollar-denominated funds. So far, we have avoided a collapse of the dollar, but today our federal debt is increasing so rapidly that we are vulnerable to the explosive inflation that is ravaging Brazil, Israel, and other spendthrift nations. In 1923, Germany reacted to its impossible debt by printing more and more paper money of less and less value until it finally became worthless. Within a year, all old debts, public and private, became meaningless. The monetary system collapsed, wiping out the accumulated savings, pensions, and insurance values of the citizens. A total financial reorganization became necessary. A new mark was issued with one new mark equivalent to 1 trillion old marks. This did not solve Germany's many problems, but it did restrain spending by politicians in the next few years. America may have passed the point of no return in its present monetary course. We now have two apparent alternatives. We may continue the present pattern of rising deficits, a steadily eroding dollar, and an increasing inability to compete in world markets. Or we can follow the example of Germany in 1923 and abruptly flood the world with paper dollars, thus defaulting on our present debt burden in a shorter period of massive adjustment. Even this drastic action will have no lasting significance if not accompanied by a change of attitude of, guess who, folks, the American people toward government and its role. A major financial crisis would be a time of great military danger that should be considered in advance by our leadership. Permanent stabilization will require a sound new fiscal policy. If we can muster the wisdom and resolve to minimize intervention by civil servants in economic affairs, there will be hope for preserving our personal liberties. Prudent policies relating to income and inheritance tax can encourage widespread capital formation, identify capital ownership, and prevent an unhealthy concentration of economic power in a few private hands. Under capitalism, wealth equates with political power. That power must be controlled. Ownership of capital must be public knowledge. Excessive hereditary concentration of wealth is incompatible with democracy. Constitutional limitations on government spending, mandatory balanced budgets at every level of government, are the only reliable means for controlling public servants in their tendencies to tax and spend and spend. All appropriations must be financed from current revenues. Taxpayer resistance will provide the needed restraint and will compel legislators to make compromises between competing needs. Reducing the size of government by stripping it of all of the unwise activities it has assumed in the past century will be a gargantuan and complex task. Our republic is a democracy of factions, each reflecting special social, economic, and political interests. Prevailing circumstances have caused politicians to respond to pressures from these factions with insufficient regard for total costs and long-term effects. Mandated spending limits will permit elected representatives to respond to the needs of each group, but with the appropriate restraint and compromise. Many state governments are operating in this manner quite successfully. Compulsory balancing of the federal budget will require give and take and political compromise. Many government activities will have to be discontinued, and their armies of employees forced to seek work in the private sector. Elected legislators and heads of government must reassert a controlling role for the common people, ending the petty tyrannies and entrenched hegemonies of marginally useful government workers. Wise planning must give appropriate consideration to our military and strategic situation. Until the world is absolutely assured of universal peace enforced by joint actions of the major powers, it will be necessary for the United States to compromise the ideal of universal free trade. So long as foreign powers threaten our internal security and our access to essential raw materials, we must retain a strong defense industry, even though this increases the cost and reduces the availability of consumer goods. Painful choices will be forced on politicians restrained by constitutional spending limits. America must remain strong enough to safeguard our liberties, but not so strong as to threaten the existence of other nations who seek a peaceful world. We still are a wealthy nation. We have sufficient resources to feed, clothe, and house our people. Thanks to the multiplication of human labor by machines, we can continue to achieve a comfortable standard of living for each family unit, but it will require all of us to work, even those who have partial disabilities. We no longer can afford to support able-bodied citizens on the public dole, perpetuating poverty from one generation to the next. Our Social Security system has become severely strained by the many obligations which have been thrust upon it without adequate funding. It requires drastic remodeling. Benefits must reflect the premiums which have been paid, just as with privately funded insurance or retirement programs. Welfare functions must be separated from Social Security and be formed by direct appropriations. Some citizens will work beyond customary retirement age when the needs of society require their assistance. Mature or long-established social insurance programs in many industrialized nations require roughly 1/4 of the paychecks of the working population to adequately fund reasonable benefits. Faced with the need for this kind of expenditure, many citizens might choose private insurance for their retirement programs. Few government officials have demonstrated sufficiently financial skill and acumen to warrant giving them the responsibility for managing this large fraction of the national income. Because of this, it would be wise to grant citizens the option of selecting approved private carriers. During the next few decades, there will be a leveling of living standards throughout the world. There you go, folks. That's a key phrase. Redistribution. Whether it is a leveling up or a leveling down will depend upon the wisdom with which humanity acts. That's not true either. Nations that prudently oversee capital formation and use will be in the forefront of economic progress. Nations whose citizens are industrious, educated, adaptable, and productive will prosper, even though they may not be abundantly supplied with domestic natural resources. People will continue to be the most important resource of all in the competition for material, intellectual, and spiritual progress. Yeah, that's why they refer to us now as human capital. We in America are blessed with a large share of the world's riches. We are a diverse and talented people. We have at our disposal effective means for transforming our collective will into sensible structuring of our government and our society. We must strive to excel in wisdom and compassion and build a better world for our children and the children of all the world. We can be masters of our destiny. That ends that chapter 6 of Common Sense Renewed by Robert Christian. And off we go. We'll see you later.